may not know each other, but here's something I think I know about you. You want your relationships to be good relationships. And this is not a Christian thing or a religious thing. This is just a thing. And if you're a person, like if you have breath in your lungs, you want your relationships to be good relationships. Even if you're not like a people person. David, I'm not a people person. You know that connections with people are kind of unavoidable. And so you want whatever connections you have with people to be good connections, right? I recently conducted a wedding with a gorgeous young couple, and during their preparation, I told them the same thing I tell every young couple pretty much preparing for marriage. It's essentially this. It's that over time, your relationship is going to get better and harder. Better and harder. It gets better because as your connection with that person grows as you spend time with them, and that's the part that you expect, right? But it's also harder because the closer you get to someone, the more you see of them. And the more you see of them, well, you do see their good side. You also see more of their less good side. The habits that you once thought were endearing become a little infuriating. He's the strong and silent type. Turns into, he never talks about anything. She's so much fun. Turns into, you know what, I just want to chill, and she never relaxes. And then there's like the everyday stuff, right? And you begin to realize that he leaves stuff around the house all the time. He leaves his pajamas on the floor and he says he's cleaned the kitchen for you. And when all he really means is that he's packed the dishwasher and not bothered cleaning any of the benches. No? Just me? Okay then. There's an awkward silence in here. When you get close to people, not just in marriage now, I'm talking about all of your relationships. When you get close to people, I think two things are true. First thing is you want to be loved by them. Like you're making the effort after all. Like you've gotten close to them, and it's only reasonable to think that as they get to know you and understand you, that maybe they should cut you a little slack every now and then. You want to be loved by them. You want them to cut you some slack because they love you, right? Secondly, when you get close to someone, you actually expect more of them. Like in a marriage, getting close to someone ups the level of obligation from them. Like you expect a certain level of behavior from them. You expect them to honor your time and investment by treating you properly. Having good relationships with people, and you know this, actually means that on some level, you have to get close to people. Because loving well means getting close. And that's kind of the underlying theme for this series, that if you want to love well, you have to get close to people. You can't love people well. You can't have great relationships with people from afar. But the closer you get to them, the more you see of them. And so we begin to do this thing. We build little exceptions to make sure we don't get hurt, to make sure we don't get damaged. We build ourselves a little self-protective bubble, of 1.5 meters or more, so that we don't have to get too vulnerable. The only problem with that is that we want unconditional love from those we don't want to give unconditional love to. We end up wanting people to act in a way that we actually don't really want to act in ourselves. And that gets in the way of our relationships. That gets in the way of our connections because that is hypocritical. And as you know, hypocrisy always gets in the way of our relationships. So, in this series, we're going to look at excerpts from 3 letters that the Apostle Paul wrote. The Apostle Paul played a key role in establishing the early church. An amazing fact when you consider that he spent considerable portions of his early life trying to put followers of Jesus in prison. But he saw something in Jesus that completely revolutionized his way of thinking, and his worldview completely changed. And the lens that he began to look through gave him extraordinary clarity on how to have great relationships with people. And he had a lot of relationships that he needed to rebuild after that sort of background, right? And so something the Apostle Paul realizes early on is that great relationships need proximity. They need closeness. It's why he writes to the church in Rome. He says, let love be without hypocrisy. Let love be without hypocrisy. Now, this kind of heading for what's about to come seems like an obvious statement, right? Of course, love is without hypocrisy, but let me backtrack a bit. See, the church in Rome was primarily meeting in small groups, probably in houses at this point. So they were really close proximity. And he's giving these house churches the household code. Now, households in Roman culture were a big deal. And Roman society didn't look favorably on newcomers to their cities who held a different understanding of how households were to be organized. Deviations from the accepted practices potentially kind of threatened the order and the stability of their society. Households were not seen as just purely private groups as they are in most Western cultures today. What happened in a Roman household affected the empire in general. One might say that violations of societal norms for households were actually a matter of national security. And what Jesus came to institute and what Paul was writing about was a completely different set of household codes from what they were used to. So when you read this later on, remember, this is no small matter. These household codes, these house rules that Paul kind of lays out, serve the same purpose that your house rules do. And I know we've talked about house rules a few times over the past few months, but house rules, serve to firstly keep the house in order for sure. They set the expectations of how each of the family members are to treat each other, usually with things like respect and dignity and honor. But they also serve to prepare members of the house for how they are to act outside of the house, to train members how they are to act in public. In our house, the reason why we have rules around table manners is so that when my kids go out in public, they know how to act in other people's houses. They know how to act in a restaurant. And so Paul, having spent the first half of his letter to the Romans primarily talking about what God did for humanity, he spends the last half, or the second half, talking about what our actions as followers of Jesus should be in response to God's actions. In other words, he's laying down a bit of a household code for them, some basic guidelines as to how you treat other people if you're a follower of Jesus. And so, as he shifts his focus from what believers are to do, he starts from the place that's the simplest in light of all that God has done. It's the simplest, it's the most straightforward, yet the most challenging. He says, love. Echoing Jesus' command that we talked about last week. Love one another. Not love as you know it or love as you've experienced it, but love as Jesus loved his disciples. And love as Jesus displayed love to the world. Love as evidenced by the cross. And all of Paul's imperatives are practical applications of that one command, the new one, not in addition to, but in place of, that Jesus gave. Love as Christ loved us. And this, Jesus says, is how they'll know you are my disciples. So Paul says to these churches, love. But let your love be without hypocrisy, because he realized that the closer you are to someone, the easier it is to see a hypocrite. And after all, the more time you spend with someone, the higher the chances are of seeing them being really inconsistent. It's kind of like you don't really know someone until you've traveled with them, spending time in enclosed spaces and under pressure in unfamiliar spots. Who they really are comes out, right? That's the whole premise of The Amazing Race. So it becomes easier to see hypocrites, but, let's not pretend we're always the victim, right? Because the closer you get to someone, the easier it becomes also to be a hypocrite. It's easier to expect them to be perfect, but give yourself a pass. It's easier to see their faults as character flaws, but yours as kind of momentary lapses. It's understandable. You've probably even seen this in your small groups, right? When you started in group, everyone seemed fine. And it was a fun group of people to be around. But as you build a relationship with the people in the group and you click with some and you realize that you don't necessarily click with everyone, you might even find yourself doing a little bit of internal judginess. Yet, you want and you expect them to love you, right? And so Paul is saying, yes, love. But do it consistently. Do it in a way that's true to the Jesus way. Notice too, he's not saying love, but give yourself some space every now and then. After all, you're close all the time and stuff happens sometimes. No, he's saying love. Love like Jesus wanted you to love, and do it consistently. Don't put conditions on your love or carve out little caveats that make it easier for yourself just because someone rubs you up the wrong way or does something a little irritating. Rather, love in a way that is consistent with the Jesus way of loving. Don't let the way you love become hypocritical just because you see all the bad, just because you see all the bad stuff from up close. How? Well, he goes on. He says, abhor what is evil and cling to what is good. Now, this is important because I want you to hear that just because you are to love someone sacrificially, that doesn't give them carte blanche to run all over the top of you. Like if you're being abused in your human connection, God does not require you to be abused. We are, as followers of Jesus, to hate what is evil, to run from it, and to hold on for dear life to what is good. But that situation of abuse, for most of us, is a long way from the reasons why we usually give up on relationships or close connections. This thought, to love without hypocrisy, by hating what is evil and holding on to what is good, serves as kind of a heading for this whole list of exhortations we're about to run through, as he goes on to define what good is. He says, be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Give preference to one another in honor. Again, this is something different for his Roman audience. He's basically saying you have a new household that transcends your family ties. It doesn't depend on your natural or ethnic bonds. And in this house, you are to give preference to one another in honor. Not lagging behind in diligence, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord. So again, he's laying down this household code. He talks about the fact that in the household, Jesus' followers were to be devoted to one another. It's like a family bond. And that's important because, these families don't always agree about everything. Sometimes families don't agree on anything, but they love each other anyway. They've got each other's back, right? Rejoicing in hope, persevering in tribulation, devoted to prayer, contributing to the needs of the saints, practicing hospitality. These are the rhythms that are the outworking of Jesus' command to love one another. Like he says, rejoicing in hope. And we do that together, right? The New English Bible translates that phrase as, let hope keep you joyful. I love that. Like we have a hope and we encourage one another in that hope. That's where our joy comes from, when we come together. But it happens when we stir each other to it together. It happens closely, in proximity. Persevering in tribulation. When stuff doesn't go our way, we don't just quit. That only happens, again, when we're together. We need each other. Devoted to prayer. He's talking about what goes on, again, in the household and how these things contribute to our relationship together. I had a friend call me up the other day and just ask if we could just get together and pray regularly. And I tell you what, it was the greatest joy. I was so thrilled. And out of that, I fully expect our bond of friendship will grow and that our relationship will be rich. It says, contributing to the needs of the saints, practicing hospitality. This is what we call fellowship, right? Like it's not enough to come on Sunday and just give each other a pat on the back or a handshake or a, fist bump or elbow bump, whatever. This is about sharing one another's burdens and blessings so that we all grow together and we glorify Jesus. And Paul is encouraging them to stay proximate, to stay close. He's encouraging them, guys, you're on the right path. And he's reminding them that loving well means getting close. And this is important because if you can't do it in the house, if you can't do it at home, if we can't establish these rhythms at home, then we are really going to struggle with what comes next. We'll never see the Fleurion and beyond revolutionized by the love of Jesus, and we will struggle to make an impact with the people we care about the most. If we can't get close, we can't love well. Just in case the Romans were like, whew, that's a challenge, he turns his attention to those outside the household. He's like, so that's what we do at home. We say please and we say thank you and we ask to leave the table before we leave the table. Now he's like, now, when we go out to the restaurant, here's what I expect. Here's how we carry out the command of Jesus. And I've got to warn you, he gets real specific and nearly everything you're about to hear will be contrary to your nature. Oh, I want you just at home just to see if there's something in this list that challenges you. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. This one kind of sounds like something Jesus would say. In fact, he did say it. The word bless involves wishing God's best on people and praying for them. Not about them, for them. Easy inside the family most of the time, but outsiders, enemies. And listen, it's really hard to do well or do properly from a distance because a blessing that's not heard is not really a blessing. Sometimes it's just sometimes begrudgingly, good thought. But the power in legitimately wishing God's best for someone who's chasing you, who's after you, who's persecuting you, and doing it overtly, That's not only challenging, but it's ludicrously counterintuitive and countercultural. But it's what Jesus' followers are called to do. He goes on and says, rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. That's called empathy. And it's what Jesus did by becoming one of us. Goes on again, he says, be of the same mind towards one another. Don't be haughty in mind, but associate with the lowly. Don't be wise in your own estimation. You know why he says this? It's because he knew the tendency of Jesus' followers to begin to think that they have it all worked out. And he says, don't do that. Love people without hypocrisy. And the way you do that is by getting close to them. One commentator I read puts it this way. He says, feelings of superiority are neither realistic nor appropriate for those who owe all to God's grace. Don't be haughty or associate with the lowly. Never pay back evil for evil to anyone. Respect what is right in the sight of all men, if possible, so far as it depends on you. Be at peace with all men. Oh, man. This list, right? Be at peace with all men. What he's saying is you can't control them, but you can control you. You can control your response. Don't be the one causing trouble or egging it on. Just, do the best you can. And if the best you can is not good enough, never take your own revenge, beloved, but leave room for the wrath of God, for it's written, vengeance is mine. I will repay, says the Lord. Don't be a revenger. Trust God to right the wrong. Returning evil for evil or good for good is the way most people live. But if you're a follower of Jesus, you're to live on a higher level and return good for evil. Of course, this requires love. Because I don't know about you, but usually my first inclination is to fight back. It requires faith. Because you've got to believe that God can work and accomplish his will in our lives and in the lives of those who hurt us. Why can we do that? How can we just let it go? Because it's what Christ did for us. But if your enemy is hungry, feed him. And if he's thirsty, give him a drink. For in so doing, you will heap burning coals on his head. Have you noticed that Paul's household code has just gone from being justifiable to irrational? Like, it makes sense to be devoted in brotherly love to those inside the household of faith, but to feed your enemy, to get him a drink, that's utterly insane. Yet, this is the way to love without hypocrisy. Because the moment you love, expecting them to love you back, give you something back, that's no longer love. Well, at least it's no longer loving like Jesus loved. Jesus' love for you was revolutionary. It went beyond your behavior. You didn't deserve it. You didn't earn it. He gave himself up for humanity, even though humanity did nothing for him and did everything wrong by him. Paul finishes this whole passage by saying, look, I know you're close with the people in your house church. I know you're living in the middle of this hub of human civilization. And I know that the proximity, the closeness to it all is just so overwhelming. But I promise you, this ethic of loving like Jesus loved, it's good, it's pure, and it will revolutionize the way you look at every relationship. It'll transform the way you relate to people because it's what Jesus did for me. Loving people well means getting close to them, like you're doing in your church, like you're doing in your culture, Romans. Loving well means getting close. And you know what, guys, I know it's so overwhelming. I know that it's not easy. I know that you look and you see everything that's wrong and you wonder how you could possibly love that person, that workplace, that enemy, that shop assistant, that child, that housemate, that ex-husband, that ex-wife. I know it's overwhelming, but here's what I would say to you. Do not be overcome by evil. Don't be overwhelmed by all the stuff you see wrong, all the hurt, all the disappointment, all the ways you've suffered. Don't let it overcome you, but overcome evil with good. What is good? It's loving like Jesus loved. See, you can't control what they do, but you can control what you do. You can control how you respond, how well you love. So, here's the practical application. This week, I want you to pick someone you've found it hard to love, someone you've found it struggle to love, and do something loving. Intentionally draw close and do something meaningful for them. Not begrudgingly, not, oh, I had to, but sincere, sacrificial. Because that's what Jesus did for you. Remember, Jesus did not come to serve, but he came to be served. And that is where we'll pick it up next week. Now, before you go, we've got a couple of discussion questions. I would love for you to stop just for 5 minutes and consider. Just go through them and think through them and really take a next step in your faith. See how this message can be lived out. Maybe just think about the person you want to do something loving for this week, and we will see you next week for church at home, or if you're in the Aldinga area, we would love for you to join us for church in person. But until next time, God bless you. We'll see you then.